This is a highly intelligent woman with an IQ of 242. Even her methods of solving cases are incredibly bizarre. Surprisingly, she can lift the victim from her thoughts. And today's case is equally strange. The victim's head was severed in half by a sharp weapon. But for Antonia, the more difficult the case, the more excited she becomes. After meticulously observing the crime scene, not a single detail escaped her keen eyes. She quickly entered a state like a god. The entire crime scene instantly appeared in her mind. A needle was inserted into the victim's neck, connected to a long tube buried underground. Blood continuously flowed from the victim's body. Her eyes followed the flow and saw the blood being channeled into a large cup. Then it was poured into a transparent cup. Next, she quickly discovered that brain tissue had been processed in a very short time. Then, clues like vines kept growing longer and longer. She continued following the clues and ventured deeper into a dense forest. After taking exactly 7 steps forward, a giant, half-severed head statue suddenly appeared before her. After observing it closely for a moment, she quickly concluded that the victim had died from excessive blood loss. She was surprised by the perpetrator's brutal method. He had stabbed a needle into the victim's carotid artery to drain all the blood. He even deliberately prolonged the killing process. Clearly, it was an extremely painful death. Yet there were no signs of a struggle at the scene. The forensic doctor standing beside her explained that they had examined the victim and found traces of tuberculin, a nerve-paralyzing poison. The killer wanted the victim to remain conscious and aware of their blood being drained. He even made the victim watch as the blood container gradually filled up. The yellowish liquid oozing from the victim's mouth was most likely a mixture of oil and red wine. Along with such a bizarre method of murder, everything strangely coincided with the lyrics of a hymn. This strange analysis of the case left John, the police officer present at the scene, stunned and bewildered. Even more perplexing was that the crime occurred in a wealthy neighborhood with extremely strict security, and the victim was the son of a powerful bank director. Yet to this day, the police still had absolutely no clue. Even the local prosecutor's office was unaware of the incident. However, John knew that the renowned police officer who called himself his teacher was actually the head of a secret European police organization called Red Queen. When faced with difficult cases, this organization would mobilize its super-high IQ criminal analysts to solve them. Antonia was one of Red Queen's most outstanding members. John had previously been asked by his mentor to solve a case. If John could persuade Antonia to return, he would escape the trouble of being falsely accused and the risk of a 10-year prison sentence. John had no other choice, so he had to comply. At this time, Antonia was living a life away from all competition, seemingly troubled by something and feeling so depressed that she sat by the window contemplating death. Just then, John unexpectedly pushed open the door and entered. Hearing the noise, she immediately recognized his purpose. As Mentor had predicted, no one could persuade Antonia to return. Only someone as fearless as John could convince her. Not long after, Antonia hurriedly went outside with John. John was bewildered when he saw Antonia immediately recognize Mentor's car. After getting into the car, she didn't say much. CPP only relied on the data analysis in the computer to deduce their destination. Then she entered her fingerprint-enabled location services and confirmed that her target was that wealthy neighborhood. As John drove, he was increasingly surprised to find that most of Raymond Reed's residents lived in the area. But what astonished him even more was Antonia's accurate prediction of what would happen at the house. They arrived at the wealthy neighborhood after dark. The area seemed to be protected by an extremely strict security system. Only after John presented his identification did the security guard give them directions. However, when they arrived, Antonia still refused to get out of the car. She seemed unable to shake off the psychological trauma from the previous case. Seeing a familiar crime scene immediately plunged her into a state of panic and anxiety. She felt as if a monster was chasing her outside the car. Suddenly, a monkey jumped out, causing Antonia to scream in fear. Fortunately, Mentor quickly opened the car door and placed a red pill in her mouth. Only with his comforting words did she gradually calm down. John was astonished, wondering whether the woman he had just brought home as a mentor was a true expert or simply insane. But the moment they entered the crime scene, his thoughts changed. Antonia, relying on only the smallest clues at the scene, had quickly reached a conclusion. Everyone was amazed. However, this was only the beginning. She also discovered errors in the previous autopsy report. She realized this wasn't the initial crime scene. First, the victim had been kidnapped and taken to another location. Then, killer had smuggled the body past tight security system. He even calmly placed the victim on the sofa as if performing familiar rituals before death. Antonia said she had never seen a crime so meticulously planned. Suddenly, she seemed to have an idea. She turned and walked straight out. Seeing this, John quickly sent someone to take her home. Unexpectedly, after Antonia returned, she dressed up and put on makeup beautifully. She even wore a red evening gown. This was because she suddenly remembered her old home with her husband and children. That day, just like today, was a full moon night, but the place was empty, not a soul in sight. Disappointed, she left the house, not even bothering to lock the door. Next, she went to Mangata Hospital and sat beside her comatose loved one. She sat silently in the chair, reviewing the files of unconvicted murderers. Although she still didn't know the killer's motive, she was certain he would commit further crimes. Perhaps everything was going according to her prediction. The daughter of a Spanish tycoon was moving her beloved horse, but as they were nearing the racetrack, disaster struck. The road, which had been perfectly normal during the day, inexplicably displayed an emergency repair sign at midnight, forcing the driver to take a detour. Unexpectedly, the navigation system led them into a dense forest. Perhaps they had fallen into a trap set by someone else, but the driver only thought they were lost. Even more surprisingly, the driver coincidentally encountered a seemingly kind forest ranger. Unexpectedly, shortly afterward, while completely unprepared, the ranger murdered the driver. The scene unfolding before her eyes terrified the wealthy man's daughter, who was sitting in the car. She quickly locked the car doors. However, she was helpless as she watched the serial killer drag her loved one out of the vehicle. Although she repeatedly honked the horn for help, no one heard her in this desolate and remote place. She could only stand and watch her loved one being murdered. Just as she thought about calling the police, she realized her phone had fallen under the front seat and was out of reach. At that moment, the killer smashed the car window with a fire extinguisher. In a panic, she snatched the extinguisher and sprayed it directly into his face. This gave her a slim chance to escape. The killer calmly pursued her. A moment later, sharp thorns pierced her foot, drawing blood. She was so scared, she didn't dare breathe loudly because the killer was whistling as he slowly approached. She still wanted to escape, but a woman's strength was no match for a man's. It was with great difficulty that she managed to run near the racetrack. She thought that if she tried her best, she would have a chance to survive, but her weak voice was swallowed by the night. She even considered climbing over the fence to escape, but at that moment, the killer appeared right in front of her. The night before, they had discovered a banker's son had been murdered. Today, they suspected that another wealthy person had been kidnapped. Because the victims were all from wealthy families, they later determined that both cases were committed by the same perpetrator. It seemed the killer was trying to convey some information to them. Antonia was constantly calculating in her mind, but even with her IQ of 242, there was still a limit she couldn't overcome. Later, the two of them, under the guise of international police officers, went to meet the wealthy father whose daughter had been kidnapped. Coincidentally, they encountered the anti-robbery team taking statements there. Antonia went into the rich girl's room alone. This allowed her to learn information about kidnapped girl. Furthermore, under the girl's guidance, she gleaned more and more details. The girl was extremely proud of her hair, but never satisfied with her figure. She frequently became angry and intensely hated herself. At the same time, she desperately struggled to escape the overwhelming shadow of her father, Carla. However, this information was largely useless for the rescue. Therefore, they shifted their investigation focus to Carla's ex-husband. Unexpectedly, they found a clue there. Moreover, they learned that Carla loved her horse dearly and was supposed to participate in the Royal Club's championship today. Upon hearing this, Antonia immediately rushed out. They quickly reached the racetrack. Then, she continued her deductions using numerical methods based on the bloody footprints on the ground. Perhaps Carla and the horse weren't here. She had been attacked in the car and then fled to this place. As the two stood high up and continued observing, Antonia also used her eyes to calculate John's body fat percentage. Then, Antonia mentally pictured and judged, based on the flight path of the flock of birds, that there must be a lot of insects in that direction. Walking along the road, she discovered the driver's body hidden in the bushes, along with a decaying horse carcass nearby. Just then, a car appeared. John quickly raised his gun and fired. Antonia immediately drove after it. The two quickly accelerated in pursuit. It turned out that intelligent people are good at everything. Although Jorge's vision was obscured by dust and she couldn't distinguish directions, she still relied on her memory to control her brain. After a long time, she found an escape route and got onto the highway. Then, the two continued to follow closely behind. As the distance between their car and the car in front shortened, Antonia's old illness relapsed. Suddenly, she saw a monkey appear on the windshield. Then a second. In an instant, more and more monkeys appeared. She tried to stay calm, then took a pill from John and swallowed it immediately. Finally, she asked him to hold the steering wheel tightly. Just count to 3 and the monkeys would disappear. Antonia started the engine and frantically pressed the gas pedal. The chase resumed, the distance between them gradually closing. But just as John was about to take a picture of the suspect, he fired a shot. Luckily, they managed to dodge it and avoided death. As they were about to catch up, the criminal unexpectedly drove into the opposite lane. To avoid losing the suspect they had worked so hard to find, Antonia made a reckless maneuver to continue the pursuit. Finally, an opportunity arose. But just as John raised his gun, a large truck sped towards them from the opposite direction. They had lost sight of the suspect's car. Their car appeared to be completely destroyed. Fortunately, there were no casualties. Unfortunately, their actions angered the anti-robbery team, who believed Antonia's actions would alert criminals. Therefore, Mentor ordered the two to withdraw from this kidnapping case. They should focus all their efforts on the murder of the bank director's son. But Antonia wouldn't give up so easily. She brought many blurry photos back to the office to process. In just a short time, they were able to clearly see the tattoo on the suspect's arm. So the next step was to investigate tattoo parlors in the city. In another development, Carla had her long hair, which she had always been proud of, cut off by the kidnapper. Then he threw her into a filthy slaughterhouse. Her feet continued to bleed and ache intensely, but the most agonizing thing was that the kidnapper wouldn't let her sleep peacefully. Since the car race, she had been relentlessly abused. Strangely, the criminal who kidnapped the daughter of Spain's richest man didn't seem to be after money. Antonia's team's efforts this time were not in vain. Finally, John obtained a small clue to solving the case. The kidnapper called himself Ezekiel. He seemed to have made an impossible demand to the bank manager. He left behind a cryptic statement: the sins of parents should not be borne by their children. However, Antonia's attention now focused on the secretary, as she was certain this person knew the hidden secret. Therefore, the two secretly monitored the secretary's house. Unexpectedly, they were inadvertently discovered by the suspect. Another day passed without any results. But when John returned home, he made a crucial discovery. His mother had invited a priest to dinner. After questioning him, he learned that the killer's statement came from the Bible, that sin is not an inheritance left by parents to their children. John immediately understood and rushed downstairs at the hospital to tell Antonia about the priest's understanding of the scripture. Unexpectedly, as soon as the priest was mentioned, Antonia immediately deciphered the true meaning of the message. It turned out that the killer wanted to take revenge on their parents by murdering the children. Conversely, the wealthy individuals, while appearing proactive, were also lying. What they feared wasn't the kidnapper or murderer Ezekiel, but the exposure of their own dark secrets to the public. This was exactly what the killer wanted. He wanted the wealthy individuals to voluntarily admit their guilt and speak out publicly. At this point, the case finally began to take a positive turn. Antonia unexpectedly took John's side. The very next day, they used the photograph to deduce the killer's appearance. They then sent this drawing to all tattoo shops nationwide. Next, the two went to the wealthy man's safe residence. John stayed outside, coordinating negotiations with the anti-robbery force, while Antonia went alone into the luxurious club next door. A map of the entire area's structure formed in her mind. Soon, she entered the kitchen, then circled around to the back, crossing the supposedly safe room to get outside. She quietly went upstairs without anyone noticing, but when she knocked on the wealthy man's door, she was discovered and apprehended by security. Unfortunately, at the last moment, she didn't have time to ask what the kidnapper's demands were. Antonia was quickly kicked out. John, enraged by the mockery, slapped the security officer. Unexpectedly, this scene was recorded by someone nearby. This would cause John a lot of trouble. However, what concerned him most at this moment was the cause of Antonia's illness. Turned out that several years ago, Antonia had been the only candidate to pass the Red Queen's interview. After a series of insane experiments, she always remained on the brink of collapse. The goal was to stimulate the hypothalamus to produce more histamine, a stimulant that keeps people constantly on alert. After obtaining Antonia's consent, the professor injected her with this supposedly miraculous drug. Unexpectedly, although the experiment was successful, its side effects began to appear soon afterward. From then on, the monkeys became a haunting nightmare for her. No matter how much she chased them away, they wouldn't leave. After talking to each other, they eventually became friends. But after saying goodbye, Antonia noticed something unusual about the taxi driver. She immediately had a bad feeling. Then Antonia was also kidnapped. Carla found some solace when she heard a woman crying from the next room. It turned out another person was also being held captive there. They encouraged each other, believing that if they could just hold on until the end, they would be rescued. Unexpectedly, the killer entered the next room. Then came the agonizing screams of the assaulted woman, plunging Carla into utter despair. The case remained unsolved, and the investigating experts were arrested one by one. But Ezekiel didn't kill Antonia. Instead, he threw her into a room full of information. Even valuables like her computer and phone were still in her bag. It seemed she wasn't in immediate danger of losing her life. But what exactly did the criminal want, and why did he have more evidence than the police? It was as if the kidnapper was secretly helping them solve the case. After observing carefully, she seemed to understand something. It turned out that Carla's father's company had laid off a large number of employees, leaving workers without money to pay off their mortgages. Meanwhile, the bank manager's son was exploiting people's desperate needs for illegal profit, leaving all the workers unemployed. Could this be the motive behind these murders and kidnappings? Soon after, Antonia saw her partner, John, appear. The two immediately drove to the wealthy neighborhood. She remembered the license plate of the kidnapper's taxi, and coincidentally, that was the vehicle the killer used to transport the body on the night of the crime. Based on the meticulously recorded notes, she sat reviewing the camera footage while telling John to drive to the nearby casino. Just 10 minutes later, she returned with 10,000 euros in hand. Because they had money, the security guards at the wealthy residential area were happy to cooperate with the police to handle the case. But things were far more complicated than they imagined. Although they had traced the license plate of the vehicle that entered and exited, the camera footage couldn't find the taxi. At this point, Antonia quickly calculated in her head. She felt as if she were directly in the video footage extracted from the camera. On the surface, nothing seemed unusual, but suddenly the image of the taxi appeared clearly in her mind. This was due to electronic interference. Moreover, there was exactly 1 second of electronic interference in the extracted video footage. If you looked closely at the two images, you would see a very clear difference. The people watching at this moment were all bewildered. The security guards, out of respect for the property, continued to re-examine the camera system. This time, they discovered that there was indeed a device causing the interference. So the two of them took the video back to their office to carefully process it. Finally, they were able to restore the image of the taxi. Unfortunately, the image from the bottom only showed the blurry faces of two people. Unexpectedly, they soon received good news. Another tattoo shop owner recognized the killer's tattoo as it was her father's unique masterpiece. Sadly, too much time had passed. When the two tried to get more information from the tattoo shop owner's father, they learned that 6 months earlier he had suffered a stroke. He was now immobile, unable to hear or speak. But this was no problem for Antonia. With her exceptional intelligence, she could understand the information conveyed through the blink of an eye. After a miraculous conversation, she obtained the words, "undercover police." Following Antonia's investigation, 4 undercover police officers with tattoos similar to those in the image were finally revealed. They were all outstanding students who graduated in 1997, but now, one of them has died of cancer, the other perished in an explosion. A third appeared on television on the very night of the crime. This leaves only a fourth as the most likely suspect. The two of them stealthily sneak into the suspect's house and find it seems booby-trapped everywhere. Even the light switch is broken. As John enters, he sees a golden retriever lying sprawled in front of the door. Just then, someone suddenly rushes out from behind. A fight immediately ensues. When John subdues the attacker, Antonia rushes over and claims the man is not kidnapper because he is blind. The investigation seems to have reached a dead end, but during their conversation, they uncover a new detail. A man named Fajardo, after learning of his daughter's suicide, developed a mental illness and was hospitalized. After recovering, he unexpectedly encounters an explosion in a tunnel, but the superiors concluded that he committed suicide due to psychological trauma. Strangely, no one found his body in the tunnel. Since then, Fajardo has completely disappeared. At this moment, Antonia immediately contacted the head of the anti-robbery team and confirmed that the kidnapper was Fajardo. Unexpectedly, Fajardo had already obtained this information. Not long before, they had received a complaint from the public. They then discovered the taxi abandoned by the kidnapper in an empty lot. Through fingerprint matching and analysis, they confirmed the perpetrator was Fajardo. At the same time, they quickly found his address. Currently, all members of the team have been mobilized and are ready for the arrest. However, Antonia suddenly had a question. With a professional assassin like Fajardo, why would he discard the murder weapon in an empty lot? Therefore, the two decided to go to the psychiatric hospital to continue the investigation. Upon reviewing Fajardo's records, they discovered he from multiple personality disorder and exhibited numerous symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Shortly afterward, they received information from the office that the license plate of the taxi was fake. Even more surprising was that the numbers on the plate matched the exact date of Fajardo's daughter's death. At that moment, John received a call from the security department of the wealthy neighborhood. Security personnel from the neighboring building had found surveillance camera footage from a gas station. The footage showed a woman in the back seat of the taxi. Before John could understand what was happening, Antonia impatiently urged them to leave. On the way, she explained that the woman in the taxi hadn't actually refueled. The pump's display hadn't changed, and the taxi clearly ran on gasoline. Yet the woman had deliberately switched vehicles at the gas station. This proved she intentionally allowed the cameras to record her. From this, it can be inferred that Fajardo faked his death to gain his freedom. His daughter was not actually dead. She was an accomplice in the kidnapping and also deliberately led the anti-theft team to discover the car with the fingerprints. From a series of clues, it's clear from the start that the police were deceived by the kidnapper. All of this was for one purpose: to lure the anti-theft team into a trap they had set. But now the operation was underway, and the entire police force stormed the house. Just as they were about to arrest the suspect sitting on the sofa, Fajardo and his daughter were observing the entire situation through the surveillance cameras. Fajardo's daughter appeared. It was the girl who had been locked in the same room as Carla. How could Carla have imagined that person who shared a room with her, who had been with her during her ordeal, was the very person who had kidnapped her? Even more terrifying was the fact that Fajardo's daughter was even more vicious than him. Fajardo hesitated for a long time as he watched the large number of police officers in his house, but he couldn't bring himself to act. At that moment, his daughter flashed a sinister smile and pressed a remote control, instantly killing the entire anti-theft team. Antonia and John rushed to the scene but only managed to save 2 of the officers in charge of the operation. Later, John accidentally discovered a file on Antonia's computer. Unexpectedly, all these files were related to a man named White. John then realized that this man's IQ was far above average. This was the enemy Antonia had been searching for, but she had been unable to prove his existence. Therefore, her family thought she suffered from paranoia, believing herself to be a victim, to the point that her father wanted to take away her custody of her son. Just then, a secretly recorded video of John was broadcast on the news. The reporters, seeking revenge against him, fabricated stories in front of the media. Meanwhile, Antonia couldn't understand why she couldn't contact her mentor, so she had no choice but to drive alone to the construction site, which was supposedly his office. Unexpectedly, Antonia's access to the area was restricted. The consequences of the explosion were finally revealed. Because their actions had put the entire organization in danger, they were both fired from Red Queen. Since then, they had essentially had nothing to do with each other. Each gradually returned to their lives as before. Antonia could only go to the hospital room to seek comfort from her husband. John, in his despair, also went to the hospital, where he visited the head of the anti-robbery squad who had narrowly escaped death and received a crucial clue from him. Before the explosion, the officer had discovered a map of underground facilities in Madrid in the house. A location was clearly marked on it, but unfortunately, he couldn't see exactly where it was. Meanwhile, Carla, imprisoned upon learning of the failed rescue attempt, felt utterly hopeless. She was unable to gather any more useful information, and Fajardo's daughter had given up the pretense. Carla's demand to her father was that he publicly announce and introduce her and her family's company to the world. This girl walked into the school with an expressionless face, raised her hand, fired a gun, and then went straight into the classroom. Her goal today was to kidnap a boy. So laughing, she stormed into the classroom and fired 2 shots to eliminate the teacher, causing the children to panic and hide under their desks. Only Jorge remained motionless, knowing that the person was there to find him. Jorge was Antonia's son. Meanwhile, Antonia encountered a visitor in the hospital room, her father, whom she hadn't seen in a long time. Upon learning of her son's kidnapping, she became the target of suspicion. Antonia lost all patience. She slapped her father across the face. Immediately afterward, before he could react, she pressed the emergency alarm button and quickly left the room, running straight to the nurse's station. When she got outside, she donned an anonymous protective suit and escaped from the hospital. Unexpectedly, she was discovered and chased by the police. At that moment, John, who was outside, heard the commotion. To give Antonia a chance to rescue her son, he drove his car straight into the police car. Although Antonia was hit and bleeding from the head, she still took advantage of the chaos to escape. Very quickly, she ran into a shopping mall, grabbed a change of clothes, and went into the changing room. She immediately called Mentor, hoping he could help her buy time and prevent her from being caught, because she absolutely had to wait for a call from her kidnapper. Unexpectedly, just a few minutes later, she actually received a call from Fajardo. But at the same time, the monkeys screaming in her head reappeared and harassed her. Meanwhile, she only had one last pill left. After taking the pill, she requested to speak to Fajardo's daughter on the other end of the line. At this point, neither of them concealed anything. They both revealed their identities and explained the rules of the game. They had to rescue the hostages within 30 hours. Otherwise, both would die. As soon as the other party hung up, Fajardo expressed his reluctance to harm children. However, his daughter reminded him that he had to adhere to his long-standing principles, because the best way to stop their parents was to use their children. Unexpectedly, Fajardo's schizophrenia flared up at that moment. As a result, his daughter immediately slapped him in the face. Surprisingly, this proved effective. Antonia had nowhere to go, so she ran to the house of the wealthy innkeeper they had met once before. It was there that she received amateurish treatment. Eventually, the bleeding from her head wound was stopped, giving her a chance to rest. But in her dreams, she was immersed in her memories. That year, as she and her husband were about to enjoy a romantic dinner, they suddenly noticed a man secretly observing them. She then seized the opportunity to question him and learned that he had come to deliver a message, claiming that Mr. White was her sworn enemy. Unexpectedly, a terrible incident occurred shortly after the couple returned home. When her husband opened the door to the stranger, he saw a man wearing a white mask standing outside. The man immediately raised his gun and fired. Antonia watched her husband fall to the ground in a pool of blood. She screamed and begged him to spare her young child, thus saving Jorge's life. When she finally reacted and chased after the assailant, he led her into an underground tunnel. Unexpectedly, the horrific images that had haunted her resurfaced, causing her to look ahead and see a woman standing right in front of her. It turned out to be Fajardo's daughter. Unexpectedly, the more Antonia longed to chase after the woman, the deeper she sank into the sand pit, unable to escape. Just like her helpless situation at that moment, it was indeed time for her to fight. To conceal herself from prying eyes, she had to wear the outfit chosen by the tattoo shop owner. She also had a terrifying tattoo drawn on her face. After confirming that no one could recognize her, she went to the department store to buy a crowbar. Then she hurried to the only remaining undercover police officer to request a map of Madrid's underground network. Finally, she went to John's mother's house to ask her to relay a message. John understood the next course of action. Afterward, Antonia went to see the bank manager because she had guessed that the half-decapitated rotary operator wasn't the manager's son, but the secretary's son. She used this secret to exchange for weapons to save her son. In return, she received a gun with 17 bullets, along with a request to help her decapitate the ringleader. Meanwhile, John's old illness suddenly relapsed. It turned out that his mother, a pharmacist, had secretly put poison in his food. After a period of emergency treatment, he fell into a coma. Therefore, the guards outside gradually lowered their guard. Soon after, John, without even changing out of his surgical gown, ran straight out. Thus, he escaped surveillance. By this time, everything was ready, and the final battle was about to begin. Antonia had to rescue her kidnapped son. However, the kidnappers were hiding in the intricate underground drainage system. Using her extraordinary memory, Antonia immediately constructed a complete map of the drainage system in her head. She relentlessly moved deeper into the trap set by the kidnappers. Meanwhile, John arrived at the subway station as planned. The two communicated by phone and headed towards the rendezvous point. But at that moment, Antonia discovered a bomb attached to the fence. It was an improved type of explosive. Before John could even analyze the situation, she decisively pulled the right wire. After venturing deeper into this path, Antonia suddenly realized that the kidnappers were merely luring them here to their deaths in an explosion. The game was surprisingly simple. Recalling the wall covered in clues earlier, she understood that the drawings weren't of train stations, but rather 8 locations where explosions had occurred in Madrid. This meant Fajardo's daughter had planted bombs throughout the city. She had even provoked them by clearly drawing the locations of each bomb. But at that moment, the damn monkeys in Antonia's head returned. This time, her supply of drugs had run out. On the other end of the line, John urgently reminded her to remember her son. Suddenly, a miracle occurred. One of the monkeys seemed to freeze in midair. In that chaotic moment, Antonia completely overcame her fear, allowing love and hope to surge and give her strength. Finally, they arrived at the pre-arranged location and immediately assigned tasks. Antonia was tasked with luring Fajardo's wicked daughter out, while John was responsible for dealing with Fajardo. Without Fajardo's help, his daughter fell into the trap. Upon hearing Antonia's cries, she rushed outside, only to discover it was just a recording playing on repeat on her phone. Meanwhile, Fajardo was about to enter the cell to deal with the hostage when he was suddenly attacked from behind by Carla. In this perilous situation, Carla risked her life, using a piece of broken glass to blind one of his eyes before grabbing the keys and running out. She didn't forget to rescue the innocent boy in the next cell. Unexpectedly, Fajardo, like a ghost, continued to pursue her. Just as Carla was about to be strangled, John's mother appeared. However, in a moment of carelessness, John was knocked down by Fajardo. In the ensuing struggle, John was unfortunately shot but still fought back desperately. Then Fajardo stabbed him again. Just as John was about to be killed, Carla's mother shot him from behind, saving both of them. But John ran to the back to find Antonia. At that moment, Jorge, while searching for his mother, inadvertently became a hostage of Fajardo's daughter. At the last moment, Antonia fired the remaining bullets in her gun to protect her child and allow her to escape. But she became the target of the enemy. Unexpectedly, Fajardo's daughter didn't fire. Instead, she waited until she finished speaking before accidentally activating the bomb her father had planted there. Thus, the kidnapping was finally closed. Carla confidently returned to her family business. The bank director's son was also safely returned. John returned to the police station and was viewed differently by his colleagues. Antonia also had more opportunities to see her son. Life seemed to return to normal for everyone. However, things weren't truly over. The police conducted DNA testing and discovered that Sandra's sample matched Fajardo's daughter. This meant Sandra was indeed his biological child. When Antonia heard this news from John, she immediately became suspicious about the entire sequence of events. She wondered if the person she had seen before wasn't Fajardo's daughter after all. Just then, the doorbell rang suddenly. A monkey unexpectedly appeared, making sounds that that seemed to urge Antonia to jump. It seemed that simply jumping would free her. At that moment, Antonia realized that everything that had happened wasn't her fault, but that someone had deliberately lured her out, making her believe the killer was seeking revenge against those in power. In reality, it had nothing to do with the pleasure of killing, nor was it meant to torment her already wounded soul. It was all just a pre-designed game. Just as she thought she was about to discover her true identity, a strange woman's voice interrupted her. Then, even stranger, the woman suddenly found herself suspended in mid-air. Antonia thought she understood everything, but then she too was suspended by thin strings. Just as the woman in the red dress had said, "We are all just puppets being manipulated." From above, the map of Madrid appears as if everything is being controlled by some invisible force. We are all puppets in his game. Whose game? Perhaps the one I mentioned earlier. That concludes Season 1 of Red Queen. Did you enjoy the series? Please leave your comments below. Thank you for your interest and support. Goodbye, and see you again.